Welcome into the Duck Territory Odds and Audibles podcast. I'm Matt Prehm, Erik Skopil, Jared Mack on the show. National Signing Day, or maybe if you're listening to this tomorrow, it's the day after National Signing Day. And boy, guys, it's been an interesting day nonetheless. This one has kind of turned into a very lackluster affair traditionally because of the early signing period. But I think from an Oregon perspective, there was a lot of movement. There was a lot of action to cover and to watch play out on this second period. Oregon finishes the recruiting class 25th in the country. I think they started the day somewhere around high 40s, maybe low 50s. They flipped four-star running back Jordan James from Georgia to go to Oregon. They landed four-star edge prospect Amarion Winston from Central Catholic, who was a former Oregon commit. And they also added four-star offensive lineman Dave Iuli, who looked like he was going to follow Mario Cristobal and instead signs with the Ducks over Miami. I think this was about as good as possible of a day that Oregon and Dan Lanning could have had.
How many schools can say they signed more in February than in December? Probably not many. I mean,
Yeah.
Oregon's one of them. They signed 7 in December and they signed 8 today. And we should note, Matt, possibilities of something more coming down the pike with commitments on Friday. And maybe we've talked in the past, Josh Connerly postponing a decision. There's classes right now is, top 25, fringe top 25. And I think there's a chance if everything kind of breaks right that this ends up being a little better than that, which is really encouraging considering that Oregon only right now has 15 commitments. A lot of these schools have 22, 25, 26, 20. I think A&M has 28, which is an absurd number. They also signed, by the way, notably the highest rated class in the history of 24/7 Sports team rankings. You could also note Marshall Malco. By the way, we learned how to pronounce his name properly today. Dan Lanning finally gave us the go ahead on how to say that. But Malco was the chief of staff or whatever at A&M and kind of helped lead that. So just kind of a slight digression, but sort of interesting to note that part. But no, I think today was big. And there, usually you look at a day and you go, well, maybe they missed on a guy and a guy there. I know Grayson Halton was a name that was a former commit. We kind of had known where this was going a couple of days ago. Like, there really wasn't anything to be disappointed about that wasn't already expected, I don't think, today. And really the only maybe surprise, quote unquote, was just the Dave Iuli part. And I think we kind of started to get inklings of that in the last 24, 36 hours or so that was headed that way. So it was, I won't say it wasn't an exciting day, but it was a day that was maybe devoid of any surprises. But I think that was a positive for Oregon. And again, I think this class is pretty exciting. There are still holes, and probably on future podcasts we can talk about some of those positions that maybe you'd like to address in other ways, or maybe they'll address those with prep players. Who knows? I think all in all, like, this is a really impressive haul for Dan Lanning and company, especially to get this done under the circumstances. And obviously they had their backs up against the wall, having to do this all really last minute. And I think a couple things stand out. A, 15 is impressive, but B, also like to retain a bunch of guys that were previous commits that have opportunities to go to other parts of the country. I mean, Iuli was looking at Miami. Amarion Winston was looking at Florida, a couple other schools. I think Washington offered and was involved. I think he took a visit there. They kind of had to hold on to some of these guys. Jaleel Florence, probably the most notable one. He committed on Monday. We already talked about that. But collectively, I think you just look at this and go, the skeleton was in place for Dan Lanning to kind of do what he's done. And now you kind of look up at it and go, I think Oregon did a really darn good job given the circumstances. And if you finish somehow in the top 20, given the circumstances, I think you take that every day.
With this finish, and I'll put air quotes around finish because signing day goes until whenever a player decides to, like with JTT last year and deciding in July where he was going to sign for the upcoming season. So, there's a chance that Oregon continues to get more prep players along the way. Just depends on scholarships. But right now, they sit 25th nationally, third in the Pac-12 behind Stanford and Arizona. Arizona's right ahead of them at 24 and Stanford's at 17. They both have 22 committed players. And now all of them, assumingly, are going to be signed in the next couple hours. Just basic math here. We're all journalists. That's a differential of 7 players. For Oregon to have this ranking with just 15 players, nearly half of their commitments are 4-star athletes, that's pretty darn good. And especially considering given where they were 6 weeks ago, post Mario Cristobal departure, all the players that they lost, I think the total number was like 16 for decommitments, 16, 17, which is not really good. I mean, I'm sure when you look back on this season, you'll be like, oh, what the heck happened here? And it's like, well, it's the same thing that happened, in 2018 when Willie Taggart left. A lot of players love going to schools for their coaches. And I think that was the case with Mario Cristobal and Oregon. And a lot of players, again, like Erik mentioned, the retention rate is really impressive considering the fact that Lanning had to introduce himself and be able to persuade a recruit to come to Oregon on just his basis alone, and then do all of that while simultaneously hiring a position staff full of guys who have to sell themselves on, like with Dave Yulee, him and Adrian Clem, like they have to get together and make sure that this is the right decision for him. I'm sure distance played a factor in his recruitment instead of going to Miami. But basically everybody down in Miami is an Oregon staff guy. So those are members of that staff that he's known for years now in his recruitment. So I think it's really impressive what they've brought along and what they've brought together. We see Jaleel Florence committing to Oregon and signing today. That's extremely impressive as well. He committed on Monday, but I digress. You have Tosh Lupoy and Coach Demetrius Martin, Coach Meat, as people refer to him. Those guys put on the full court press for him. And it just kind of makes me feel like if Oregon were to put on a full court press on a lot of players, that could get the job done going here on out. I think it's a severe understatement that this was a good day for Oregon. I think this was an exceptional day. I don't use that term really lightly either. Just to see where this class ends up, even with 15 players, even though this isn't as good as what it has been in recent years under Mario Cristobal, just the pure potential that this staff has with a foothold with a lot of coaches from the West Coast and the Pacific Northwest, but also the Southeastern area of the United States. I think there's just a whole bunch of potential where this team can go. If Oregon continues to win on the field as well, that's obviously a huge factor. But Marshall Malco in charge of it all, I think he's played a very instrumental role in all of this and getting coaches and players at the right spots at the right times. I think this, in terms of recruiting, is that Oregon is really set up for success in the long run. And I'm excited just to see what happens in the next few months when they are able to start, recruiting 2023 prospects again.
We should note that when 24/7 Sports this year implemented a ranking where they can now combine prep and JUCO players signed with a school along with transfers. And when you go to the rankings and you add the transfers into the class for Oregon and for everybody else, Oregon actually jumps up a couple spots. They are ranked 22nd. They're second in the Pac-12, one spot ahead of Arizona. USC is 10th, and they're first in the Pac-12. USC added something like 14 or 15 transfers in the portal. Oregon did just 5 for their class. So their newcomer addition for the 2022 class is 15 high school players plus 5 transfers, and there's potential for one more. That's 5-star offensive tackle Josh Connerly Jr. Out of Seattle. He won't make his decision until March. I guess there's 2. March for Connerly, and then there's also Arlis Boardingham, who will make his decision, a receiver. He announces on Friday here on the 4th of February. So we'll see if Oregon can add a couple more players, but we're going to focus on just who is in right now. And one notable, interesting nugget from this recruiting class is Dan Lanning has said multiple times that they're after speed, whether it's on offense as a running back or as a defensive player in the secondary or a linebacker. They're after speed. And they have gone out and they've signed some pretty darn elite speed guys. And you don't want to say that freely, but it's pretty impressive the players that they've been able to tack onto this class.
Yeah, I think we can say elite speed when we have track times that are as fast as they are. And this was a stat that Coach Lanning shared during his press conference today that I wasn't familiar with, but 5 players they signed with 10.7 100-meter times or better. Did some background on that. He's not exaggerating. It's all true. Cornerbacks Jaleel Florence, Jaleel Tucker, and Kamari Terrell have all run 10.72 to 10.78. So that's really fast. And then this kind of surprised me. The 2 linebackers that were signed in December, Harrison Taggart and Devin Jackson, faster than the corners. Taggart ran 10.7. Jackson ran 10.54, which is absolutely flying for that size. And you kind of think in terms of what we saw from Georgia, for those that watch this team this year, I think especially at the second level, the speed at which those guys ran, sideline to sideline. You think about how hard it was to run anything off tackle or even anything in the screen game because guys are just flying around. Oregon has a couple of those guys with that speed, those speed characteristics now. Not that they didn't before. I think Adrian Jackson out of high school was another 10.7 guy, and I'm sure other players in the roster have to go do a deep dive on this to confirm that have also run that time. But to get 5 guys on defense who can all be elite sprinters, and we should also mention Kamari Terrell's best event is the 400. Finished 3rd in the Open Nationals 400, by the way, last year at Hayward Field in Eugene. Also notable, Dan Lanning said a couple of guys are going to try to do both track and football. I asked which players. He didn't want to share which, but I think Terrell's a pretty likely one considering he's one of the fastest 400-meter runners in the country. And his time, I think somebody said would have finished 3rd at the Open 400 meters in the Pac12 this year. Or this last year in 2021. So speed is the name of the game there. And I think that's a game changer. And I think not only the speed at linebacker, which I just talked on, but I think at corner, really encouraging the types of bodies they're going after, and then also the speed. Like I look at these 3 players, all of which are 6'1" or taller, all of which kind of have long limbs, 180, 190 weight, very similar to Dante Manning, in terms of the body types. And I think Manning also a 10.7 guy out of high school in Missouri. Like they're kind of going and finding clearly certain metrics that they like with that position. And Manning is somebody who we're still kind of waiting and seeing what he can produce. Obviously a 5-star recruit, highest rated Oregon corner signing of all time, highest defensive back signing for all time for that matter. But 3 guys that have very similar measurables athletically. And both Tucker and Florence from a 247 Sports recruiting perspective, I know the composite isn't quite as high, top 100 recruits as well. So I think Oregon did a great job at corner in this cycle. Demetrius Martin deserves a ton of credit. Matt Powledge deserves credit for helping out with Terrell, who's from, the Dallas area. I think a guy who previously was really looking at Baylor, but obviously Powledge leads Baylor to Oregon. So I think the secondary is the star of the show, to be honest with you. I think, those 3, and then also Trejon Williams sticking with his commitment today out of the Portland area is not quite in that same speed realm, but another really high-end defensive back prospect. And Oregon went out, and I think if there's a position group you feel really good about in this cycle, I think that's the one where I'd start.
Well, I mean, you came into this recruiting cycle with worries about 2 positions. That was wide receiver and cornerback. And I think that Oregon has certainly shored up the depth at cornerback. Obviously, these are all true freshmen, so whether or not they'll be really good or really bad is still yet to see. The corner group in general still has a lot of question marks. Not really sure where they're going to go. Like Erik said, still waiting on Dante Manning to kind of step up and become this 5-star player. Christian Gonzalez, another transfer that they got in this cycle, is somebody who has actual Pac-12 experience. The speed is really, I thought was kind of a curveball. I don't necessarily know if I expected that from Lanning and his new staff but you're right. You watch Georgia's defense. It's a sideline to sideline thing. No one's getting outside of them. It's just quick muscle twitch fibers just going and chasing down opponents on the sidelines. And that's what all these cornerbacks all they bring. And Erik, I was going to mention this if you didn't. They're all basically like the same size and stature. They're all like that 6 feet to 6'1". I think Jaleel Tucker might be listed at like 5'11". I don't know off the top of my head. but they're like 6 feet, 6'1", 180, 190 pounds. And that's a really good mold for a DB. Someone with long arms, that's somebody who isn't going to be significantly smaller than any wide receiver that they line up against. Can fight for possessions against tight ends because they're 6'1" with long arms. They get into their sophomore and junior seasons and they start to add weight. Then they get stronger and they hold up against those bigger, more physical wide receivers down the road. I think it's totally fair to be extremely excited about this cornerback potential down the line. I don't know how you couldn't, really. There's 2 top 100 players from the same high school, too, in Lincoln High School down in San Diego, and the 2 Julios. So I think those guys could be somebody or could be someone who makes an immediate impact at corner. I think Kamari Terrell is a little bit more of a project, but is also like the fastest of the bunch. And I kind of look at him as somebody who could maybe be a kick returner down the line just for pure blazing speed. We'll see about like his quickness and explosiveness just right off the bat in terms of getting a kickstart, because his best time is in the 400 where he has a little bit of time to reach top speed. But again, speed is really important in this class, and I wonder if that's going to continue during 2023 and 2024. If they're going to continue to go after these type of speed guys, but it's pretty prevalent in this one. And to know that Devin Jackson, a linebacker, is the fastest of the bunch in 100-meter, that's really impressive. I'm excited to watch him play. I think he could really be an impact guy from day one, if barring any injuries.
One interesting note, Eric, you brought up the fact that the DBs are kind of the stars of this class. I think just the class in general is pretty darn impressive, because you look at just the 24/7 Sports rankings, and look, we're biased. We work for 24/7 Sports, but I think we all three would agree that we trust our evaluators the most, and that would make the most sense too. You look at just the 24/7 rankings by our own rankings by ourselves. Oregon's class is actually 16th in the country, and there are 4 teams ahead of them that have a better class than Oregon simply because of numbers. Oregon's per recruit average is better than 4 teams ahead of them in our own rankings, meaning just Dan Lanning just didn't have enough scholarships to go out and offer players. And when he assumed the program, most of these recruits had already committed to the schools as well. And if this class could have been, probably should have been even better if they just simply had more time and simply had more offers to give out. Oregon's lack of scholarships have greatly impacted this class's ranking, and that's not a negative. It's just a fact. I'm coming away. The more I think about it, the more I look deeper into this class, the more impressed I am with Oregon's recruiting class. The speed is a massive addition at multiple position groups. I think the offensive line, getting Dave Yulee into the mix here is critical. I think you add Jordan James and Justice Lowe at 2 positions that, quite frankly, they need bodies, and they've just added 2 guys that are 4-star players.
Yeah, we haven't even really talked about Jordan James, and that might be, I want to say, the player I'm most excited about, because I honestly, Jaleel Florence to me is Javon Holland-ish-esque in terms of watching his tape, just size-wise, measurables. Jared, you brought up Kamari Terrell in the return game. I think there's a great chance that Florence is another consideration there, especially in punt return situations from watching his film. But Jordan James is a guy, and I know I was probably more excited at one point about Andrew Paul just because of his tape, but like the more you watch Jordan James and the more you read up on him and kind of learn on him, this is a guy who I think will contribute right away. Like, I'm not going to be surprised at all if he's somebody that is a pretty involved part of this offense. And as Matt said, that might be kind of by necessity because of the numbers on the roster right now. There's just not a lot of scholarship running backs. Oregon's been hit by the transfer portal. They've been hit by Burdell going pro, or staying in the draft, I guess. You needed to find a player. And I still think there's room to add more. And in fact, I think one of the things that kind of stood out was Dan Lanning was asked, I think straight up, about, hey, you need more running backs? And he said, like they're always going to look to enhance the position. But he also noted like they might get creative, and you might see receivers in the backfield. You might see other players on offense move around a little bit. He didn't say it, but my first thought was, could we see Noah Sewell finally take some snaps at running back? Like maybe if he gets like in goal line, like I mean, they said they want to be versatile. I don't think it's much more versatile than going from like Sevin McGee, who's like a really fast, quick twitch runner, or a Byron Cardwell, to a 260-pound steamroll, steam engine coming downhill in the goal line or in short yardage. But like I think that was a little notable because to me, I still think 4 running backs is okay. I personally think you'd like to have maybe 5 and even 6 sometimes, depending upon kind of the roster setup. And receivers, the same kind of thing. And that's what made getting Justice Lowe such a big deal. Like, I think he's a great player, by the way. As Matt said, he is now a 247 Sports 4-star. He earned a recruiting ranking bump in the most recent rankings update, which is actually a final update. A player that people are really high on because of his senior year. And again, probably going to need to see him play. And I think one of the cool things about today we haven't talked about that I know we wanted to was, how about just signing 3 kids from the state of Oregon?
Yeah.
And I know obviously Lanning said, one of the first things he said in his press conferences, you go where the players are. But he's also made it very clear, and again did so today, that like you have to win your state and you have to win your state battles. And I'm sure, Matt talked about, some kind of misses on the recruiting trail. I think if Oregon had more time with Dan Lanning and this staff, like Darius Clemens, who's the highest rated recruit in the state who signed with Michigan, like I probably Oregon is a little better spot there. They might have ended up with Clemens, who would fill an immediate role at receiver for Oregon. Mm-hmm. So I think you have to really, 3 of the 4 highest rated recruits in the state signed with Oregon. Oregon should be able to do that. That should be the expectation. If there are 3 or 4 guys Oregon wants in the state of Oregon, they should be able to go out and get them. And Dan Lanning showed he could do that. And again, did so in a class where he didn't have a whole lot of time to accomplish that. And it was notable that the first day on the job, in terms of hitting the trail, he was up in Portland visiting with Justice or Trey John Williams or Marion Winston or whoever it was, to ensure that this was how it was going to play out. And again, I think Winston and Williams are 2 good young players, as well as Lowe. So I think you can't ignore the fact that Oregon did a good job of casting a wide net, getting kids out of Texas and getting kids out of Southern California, Utah, Nebraska, et cetera, but also most notably 3 kids from their own backyard.
Yeah, of all years, this is one of the better ones to go and get everybody from your backyard in Oregon. Classes in the state of Oregon are kind of up and down. Every once in a while, there'll be a good class like this year's class, and Oregon took full advantage of it. Darius Clemens going to Michigan that hurts, but at the time of his commitment to Michigan, it seemed like Oregon was going to have a decent amount of wide receivers still on their roster. That has changed quite a bit since. But getting Justice Lowe is important. Marion Winston, I'm kind of high on. He's a much bigger player than his brother Lamar at Oregon. More of a more natural linebacker guy. Lamar was kind of a tweener, little edge player more often than not. But yeah, it's always important to hit your home state hard, especially in a state where you don't necessarily have a lot of competition with the other state school in terms of really good recruiting. No blatant disrespect to Oregon State, but I think everybody who's listening to this podcast understands that Oregon over the last 2 decades has figured out how to recruit, and Oregon State is still getting there, but getting better. Use of the transfer portal, they use it quite well. But this was an opportunity for Oregon State to steal one of these in-state prospects, and I don't necessarily know how hard Justice Lowe or Marion Winston were really looking at Oregon State as an offer, but they ended up choosing Oregon, and I think that's it's a really good thing for Oregon to keep their in-state guys in, because despite there being a lot more talent on different parts of America, keeping players in your state is one of the bigger things that any school can do, and that's what the big school in a state is supposed to do, is keep the best guys at home when they can. But I just want to touch on Jordan James for a second, because that has kind of flown under the radar. Georgia commit, stayed out of the state of Tennessee. Murfreesboro, is that it, Eric? Murfreesboro, Tennessee, something like that.
Murfreesboro?
Yes, something. I still don't know how to pronounce it. I still don't even know how to spell it. Yeah, man, he's an instant impact guy. Spent a lot of time watching his tape the last couple of days, ever since we learned that that might be a real possibility of him flipping his commitment to Oregon. Really impressive. Really strong legs. He has kind of breakaway speed. I'm not sure if he's another track guy, but he certainly has, this breakthrough to the next level speed. I think Lanning referred to him as a one-touch touchdown guy, which means you touch the ball once and you're off. That's exactly what he is. Thick frame, 5'11", listed at 205, 210. I don't know if he necessarily reminds me of any Oregon running back in the past, but he has I don't know if he does, honestly, but he has this great motor where he can flip from kind of a finesse football and making jukes and cuts and spin moves and trying to get out of arm tackles, and then just going full power, like right through the line of scrimmage and getting 4 or 5 yards just because he needs to. I think he's going to be a really impact guy, right off the bat. And that's like Erik, like you were mentioning, this is a situation where he really kind of needs to be with only 3 or 4 scholarship running backs, depending on how you look at Seven McGee. And I think that's one of the biggest things of the day for Lanning, was able to flip this guy from the Southeast, from Tennessee, from his Georgia commitment, with other huge SEC and Big 12 schools coming after him as well, knowing that he might flip a commitment. For Oregon to land him, head west, and him feel comfortable, him and Carlos Loughlin have a great connection, as Lanning was talking about at his press day today. Just a huge commitment for Oregon, and something that might be something to keep an eye on going forward and future classes with trying to get kids on this later signing day.
Across the conference, it's certainly eye-opening. You look in the Pac12, USC finished first with overall team rankings. Oregon was second, Arizona third. But you also look deeper down, and guys, I don't know if you saw this or not. Washington almost didn't crack the top 100 in its rankings. They were 92nd. A school called Campbell, no idea who that is.
Campbell College?
Yes. Finished
Nice.
higher than the Huskies. Arizona State was even worse. This is where we look at things in the Pac-12. Oregon had a good day. USC certainly had a good day. Stanford had a good day. Arizona certainly had a good day. But this is where the conference's bottom needs to pick itself up a little bit, whether it's through transfer portal or whatnot. This is where the league needs to see its schools kind of pick up the pace. Oregon had a down year, and it still finished in the top 25. I think that's pretty notable from an Oregon perspective. I just wanted to mention that really quickly, just where Oregon is at within the conference and kind of some levels of around the conference. But we also learned quite a bit about this staff watching Dan Lanning during an Oregon Booster Club signing event, talking to him personally this week. We talked to him on signing day as well. We also saw Joey Mack, host of Duck Insider. He's also works with the pregame show. He's the sideline reporter for the football program, as well as the men's basketball play-by-play caller. He had every single assistant coach on his Duck Insider show for the University of Oregon's official site. And guys, I think watching all of that play out, consuming all the other Dan Lanning content that we could get our hands on, speaking with Dan Lanning again today, I'm more and more impressed and continue to get sold more and more on this staff's future success.
I think the more you see Lanning just communicate and how he operates, it's pretty impressive. And I don't want to make it a compare and contrast from the previous coach who was here, but there's a little bit different energy, and kind of he smiles more. He seems more engaged. He cracks more jokes. I asked Dan who were some of the 10-7 guys, and he said I could find that doing research, but he wanted to assure me he wasn't one of them, which, I mean, shoot, I don't think any of us could run 12-7, 13-7. I don't even know what we could run. So, I mean, Dan's probably faster. Yeah, Dan's probably faster. I don't think so. Dan's, I'm sure, faster than we are, I would think, maybe close. But I thought I appreciated kind of the humor element there. And I think that comes across from the staff too. I'm not saying they're like a bunch of jokesters and goofy guys, but there's a level of levity too, a lot of passion and energy. You can see why this staff is built to recruit because you hear them as communicators and they connect well. Again, they have the right things to say. I think we'll get to some of the other takeaways. I think some of the things Kenny Dillingham, the new offensive coordinator, had to say about what this offense is going to be. Like, you get why Oregon should recruit well because his pitch that he's just basically, condensing and saying on a TV, I guess a live stream is compelling. Like I'm listening to it going like, sign me up. That sounds pretty good. Like this is some of the things he's saying are things that we haven't really heard said about an Oregon offense in quite some time. And I know some of that harkens back to some of the things he said, and we'll get to it later. Harkens back to a little like the Chip Kelly era, so maybe it's just some of the what is it? You just falling back into kind of things you've appreciated from the past. Nostalgia was the word I was looking for. But like at the end of the day, I came away from all of that being like, this was really informative, and certainly you get a sense of who these guys are. And I'm excited, frankly, too. I think there's going to be an event sometime later this month where we'll have an opportunity to meet with all of these coaches. I'm excited for that to happen and to, in one-on-one settings or face-to-face settings, hopefully at least, see what these guys are like, see how they respond to questions, see if that, see how much of this feels genuine, see how much of this feels real and get a sense of it. But like on first glance, I think you come away being like, man, these are some really engaging communicators and speakers, and a lot of the things they said, and we'll get to some of it, I think really stands out as being things you can be really excited about for where this is headed.
Oh, 100%. I think it's just a youthful movement. It's like youthful exuberance that has surrounded this entire program now. And granted, some of these guys are old, mid-40s, but, Lanning, Dillingham, early 30s, they're going to be guys with a lot of energy, a lot of activity, and a lot of personality. Whether or not the old staff has just been around the block enough at multiple schools and it's just kind of done with trying to I don't know, maybe fake that they're being happy when they're being questioned by reporters. And when we get to see them, maybe they're great on the inside, who knows? But just in general, it just seems like the staff has a lot of chemistry together already, which I think is interesting. But then again, when you look back at where they came from, where they were hired from, and the histories, they all kind of, at one point, all of them kind of crossed lines, and all of them had known each other from a different relationship. And I think that's really important. Dan Lanning was asked about coach chemistry today at his press conference, and he says it's a huge thing. It's as big as of looking to have chemistry like with recruits and stuff like that, like having a coach chemistry and needing to trust each other is such a huge thing when it comes to coaching, and it will even more down the course of a season with in-game scenarios. But yeah, I think all of these guys have a lot of charisma. Erik, I felt the same way. I feel the same way every time Dan Lanning talks and gets motivational. I'm just ready to go run through a brick wall. I think I've texted you that like multiple times, and just like, all right, let's go, let's do it. Find me a brick wall, somebody. And Tony Tuioti, he went on with Jack Mack of Ducks of Oregon and began his 2-minute life story. Joey Mack kept asking the coaches to kind of introduce themselves to the fans, and he started off by talking about how the Patriots had a dynasty and this team had a dynasty, but he's like, my wife and I had 7 kids in 10 years, so that was the Tuioti dynasty. Yeah, stuff like that is just, you understand why players like being around these guys on the staff, and they like talking to them. They feel like they have a real personal connection with them because they're all just humans at the end of the day, like you and me. But there's a part of it that kind of gets lost in the culture of football, where they're all just, presumably quote unquote like meatheads, like, just want to just go out there and play football. But all of these guys have a personality. Same thing with Tosh Lupoy. He had I don't even know what the event was called, the signing day event at the Graduate Hotel in Eugene. Was kind of shy for a little bit, and then he got talked into the details of what it takes to be a football player at Oregon and his defensive strategy and his schemes. And at that point, you kind of realize, I texted Matt this, and it's like, all right, now I kind of understand why this guy is heralded as a really good recruiter. He just has a very proper cadence when he's talking, and he has this way of describing and convincing people that, this is the right move in this situation and blah, blah, blah. And so I'm with you, Matt. I've been high on this staff just because I think the youth movement is always a good thing. Maybe it's because I'm a youthful movement here, but I'm even more confident and excited to see where they go, especially as they all finally get settled into Eugene after being away for 6 straight weeks.
This class is potentially still going to get better. Josh Connolly is a 5-star on the board. He will decide in March. He's going to take official visits in the month of March to USC and Oregon. He'll also unofficially visit Washington and then make his decision. Arlis Boardingham is a 3-star athlete. Oregon's recruiting him as a receiver tight end hybrid. He's going to make his decision on where he goes between Oregon and Florida. That decision will be made potentially on Friday, and he said that he could even push that back if he's still not certain about where he goes. Oregon, the key thing here though is regardless of either of them, I feel like Oregon is right up to that scholarship limit of 85 scholarship players allocated for 2022. So they can still sign more guys, but for every player that they sign, one player on its current roster is going to have to depart the program. So that could be kind of a tip in some news that could be coming down the road here a little bit, is if they take another guy, the staff is anticipating someone currently on the roster to leave. And that's going to happen probably. It's spring football. Guys transfer. Natural attrition happens. And so that's something to watch out for. And then seeing how these additions impact its current roster will also play out in spring ball. I mean, Dan Lanning has already come out and said at that signing day luncheon with the Oregon Club in Eugene that he was asked, what position is Jackson Powers Johnson playing? Because he played offensive line the first 13 games of the season. And then in the Alamo Bowl against Oklahoma, he played D-line. And we all just thought it was, hey, D-line got ravaged by injuries, guys transferring out of the program, Kayvon Thibodeau going pro. This is just a move to give them bodies. He'll be back. Dan Lanning has said he's going to start on the D-line for spring football. It's interesting. But it also makes sense a little bit now that like a guy like Dave Iuli has joined the program, where Oregon now has another interior offensive lineman, highly regarded guy that can play guard, which Jackson Powers Johnson did play.
Yeah, not to mention the fact that I think we all looked at Jackson and thought probably not starting in 22. More than likely 23 is where he has a chance, and maybe you give him an audition year. And it's also possible that they watched the film of the Alamo Bowl or not practice film and just thought, this guy's really good here. Tim DeRuyter said that when he was the defensive coordinator, he kind of saw Jackson as somebody who could play that side of the football and was kind of pulling for him, and maybe Dan saw the same thing and felt the same way. A couple other notes from that sort of thing. Sounds like spring ball starting mid-March, which is kind of news. I mean, we hadn't got official timeline. It also sounds like it's going to have a similar structure to what Mario Cristobal did, where you have spring ball for a couple of weeks and then a short break for spring break so the student athletes can go home and enjoy themselves a little bit, and then, returning to Eugene and reuniting for the last couple of weeks. He's also shared a couple of days ago at the halftime of the Oregon men's basketball game against Oregon State that the spring game will be played on April 23rd at 1 p.m. So you can put that in your calendars. I think most listening probably are already familiar with that, but I think it's the first time we've said that on a podcast / this YouTube show. So thought that was notable. And then I did want to just quickly address some of the things Dillingham said about the offense, because I found that to be, I don't want to be reductive or diminish any of the recruiting stuff, but for me, as somebody who's like, a team reporter, like some of the stuff he was saying was really interesting about the offense, about how they were hoping to, run 80 plays per game. By the way, last year's team, 68, year before that, 61. Oregon, I believe, ran more than 80 plays most recently in 2012, which was, I believe, the last year Chip Kelly was here. So maybe a return to a little bit of that. He said the offense is going to be versatile. He said he considers it a pro style. I think a lot of people think or hear pro style and think under center. He's not necessarily saying that. He's talking about pro style in terms of identifying matchups. For example, the previous staff, you had a boundary receiver, you had a field receiver, you had a slot receiver, and the boundary and field were kind of predetermined. Guys were either X's, they were either Y's, they were either Z's. Nope, there was not as much movement there. What they're trying to do now is identify on the field of, hey, we want to get Troy Franklin the rock because he's really good on one-on-one situations. Let's go pick and find the defensive back or the linebacker that we can get him on where he can have the most success. And not that any of this is, it's not unique to say, you're going to build your offense or your team around your talent, but it's a little different than even what we've seen recently under Joe Moorhead, where again, you had specified position groups or specified position pairs. I'm not saying you don't have those positions, but you were, Micah Pittman played one spot. Troy Franklin would play one spot. And of course they could cross train and move around, but primarily they were either X, Y, or Z. I think you're going to see a lot of rotations, a lot of moving guys around. You might see players playing a variety of places on the field. And that's where, what I think kind of pulling this together, when Dan Lanning says, we don't know if we need more running backs because we have, ways of getting creative. I kind of think of this of, you could have a receiver who lines up in the backfield. You could have a running back and a receiver back there. You could have, receivers lining up closer to the line of scrimmage, in a tighter formation. I just think you could see a lot more creative things. So I got excited by that. But I think the big thing that Oregon fans are responding to is the pace and the tempo it sounds like they want to play with, because that was Oregon football for so long. And that was a defining characteristic, was Oregon went fast and went faster than anybody else. And they went fast before anyone else really thought to go fast, at least at this level. And I think it sounds like there's going to be a return of some sort to that.
Yeah, I'll touch on the offense in a sec. I just wanted to talk about Jackson Powers-Johnson real quick. I really like him as a guard and as a center. But when you have Ryan Walker and Alex Forsythe coming back, it's clear that he was probably going to start the year as like the first offensive lineman off the bench, which for him, I'm sure isn't exactly what he wanted to do. But I think he has the talent enough to be a full-time starter on the offensive line. I thought he was good against Oklahoma. I didn't think he was great. I didn't think he was bad. I thought he held his ground for somebody who had to basically be thrown in there as just a replacement in terms of everybody that they lost, including Popo and Kayvon Thibodeau. But yeah, I'll be excited to see it. I don't know if it'll last. I don't know if it'll stick in terms of him playing defensive line the entire year, but that's just something to keep an eye on going forward. But yeah, like you, Eric, I'm extremely interested to see how the offense will operate under Dillingham. He's never really truly had the chance to be his own play caller. He was the offensive coordinator at Florida State, was the offensive coordinator at Auburn. It's been kind of documented that he wasn't the only play caller, and that was seemingly a knock on him for a little bit. Granted, I don't really think it is when you get to coach or when you get to be the offensive coordinator at Auburn at 29. I think that's pretty indicative of who you are and what your mind is as an offensive play caller. So I have some good confidence in him. When he said pro style, I didn't go to immediately under center. Maybe I'm showing my age, but when I think of pro style, I'm like right now I'm thinking of what the NFL has been for the last 6-7 years. And that's something like, the Kansas City Chiefs or the Buffalo Bills of recent. What Chip Kelly did 10 years ago is now a pro style offense.
Yep.
You don't see too many teams go under center all the time, like the Colts did with Peyton Manning, like the Patriots did with Tom Brady, or how the Steelers used to run Ben Roethlisberger, someone like that. That doesn't really happen anymore. So the first thing I thought of was, well, if Oregon runs a pro-style offense, you could be seeing them trying to run something like the Bills or the Chiefs, something like that, which, would be pretty good. Those guys are good at offense, and granted, they have two of the best quarterbacks in the league, but that's just what I kind of envisioned. And I don't think the 80 plays is realistic. I think it'd be incredibly hard to get that as like an average or just like in a 1-game span. But to hear Dillingham talk about how he wants to go higher tempo is fine by me. I have no problems with that. I would love to see a higher tempo. I think when you have kids in their basic, or not their athletic prime, but in this probably some of the best shapes of their lives, going a little more up tempo makes sense, puts the defense on their heels. It's why Chip Kelly did it. It's why Oregon was good at it for a long time. I think defenses have adapted at this point. There's very few schools that don't run something like a spread offense where it's pass happy. But again, I think a good balance between pass and run, especially considering that you have a great returning offensive line with basically all 5 starters coming back. I think they're going to be able to run the ball effectively too, but that doesn't have to change how they play in their tempo. Lastly, the being creative with putting some, like what Lanning said, putting some non-running backs in the backfield. How about a little Terrence Ferguson action in the backfield? Little Travis Kelce, little belldozer Blake Bell, like the Chiefs run, another Chiefs reference. Just don't run those plays on 4th and short. That's all. Just stick to your game plan. That's all I ask.
It's going to do it for us here on the Odds and Audibles podcast. Thank you for listening to the show. Again, Oregon 25th in the country from a prep and JUCO ranking standpoint. They are also 22nd when you take into account all the transfers with all the prep and JUCO players signed. Ducks aren't done yet, so keep locked in on duckterritory.com as they continue to potentially add more names to the 2022 class. And as more than one coach at Oregon said today, hey, they're behind right now for 2023, kids, so it's time to catch up with the rest of the country. So 2023 recruiting doesn't start tomorrow, doesn't start in a month or 2 months. It's already started. So you can go to duckterritory.com for more coverage on that as well. Until our next podcast, thanks for listening. You've been listening to the Odds and Audibles podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.
Peace.